Good morning to everybody. First of all, two notes. The first one is thanking our guest. Thank you, Janos, for inviting me to this spectacular conference. Fortunately, I could not be here yesterday because I was in another conference in Rome, but I'm very happy to be here today. The second is a bias. I'm a pro-European Unionist, so of course my way of thinking is like yours. I'm very in favor of the European integration. I did my PhD at the European University in Florence, so of course I have a strong knowledge and roots and feelings on European integration. So this is my bias, so I have to tell you this in advance. Okay, but the topic that was sent to me, it's a difficult topic because kind of I'm the only, let's say, Western European in this room. So Janos asked me to provide a kind of point of view from the others, which is a very difficult task also because I'm a lawyer and not a political scientist, which is an advantage because so I do not have to collect different ideas and so on. But anyway, let me try to... So this is Europe. This is Europe as it is today, the 27 member states. And as we see this image, wow, after World War II, we have a country, a European geographical entity that is also a kind of political entity. But as we know, getting to be 27, actually we have been also 28, as you may remember, states is an accomplishment, it's a spectacular accomplishment, which actually needed a lot of effort. I mean, at this moment, there are some problems with the rule of law concerning some Eastern European countries, but remember, in the history of European integration, there have been a lot of problems with voting in the 60s and so on, the blocking France versus Germany. I mean, we have a lot of these problems during the history of European integration. But in order to grow stronger, you need to have difficulties. Without difficulties, nobody will grow stronger. So this is very important. We always had problems. We will have problems. We will solve problems. This is my idea. So those are the enlargements. You know all of them. What is interesting is the number of enlargements. We have the 6 founding members, then 3 extra ones. Then we have another one. So we have small enlargements before the 2004, which was the very, very big enlargement in which also Hungary became part of the European Union. What is the difference? Because the first enlargements were small countries, not very precise precondition to become a member state. And then, of course, in the early stages of the European Union, the so-called acquis communautaire, which means the bunch of legislation, of European legislation, was little by little it increased. Every day we have new regulation, an increase of the stock of legislation that new member states have to accept without having had the chance to cooperate in establishing such a legislation. So the new member state in the future will have to accept what has been the accomplishment of more than 70 years of European legislation, the so-called acquis communautaire. This is another view to remember what have been the member states and the enlargement. So what are the conditions, the today condition to become members of the European Union? Article 49 is the basic of the Treaty of the European Union, is the basic rule. So a European state, first of all, you should be a European state, which means geographically part of Europe, which respect the values referred to Article 2, we will come to Article 2 later on, may apply to become a member of the Union. And then there are the conditions. And then there is a reference to the condition of eligibility agreed upon by the European Council. Which are these conditions? These conditions have been established in 1993 and in 1995. Those are the so-called Copenhagen criteria. There are 3 kinds of criteria. First, we can call it the democratic criteria, which is stability of institution guaranteeing democracy, the rule of law, human rights, and respect and of protection of minorities. Second, economic criteria, the functioning of the European market. The third, the ability to accept and to cope with the European legislation. European legislation there's a very huge amount of legislation which is technical legislation. You know, like the train. That was a process in the US. I've been studying integration in federal countries. And when a state decides to have a common train, to have train going from one country to other country, there's a problem if the size of the rails is different, because you cannot change the wheel of the train. So you have to adopt common standards. So when you get and become a member of the European Union, you have to change your standards. When I was young, I remember that on the streets we have different colors, yellow, white, and so on. Now, on all of the European streets, we have white lines. The yellow lines are only for temporary works, just to give you an example. Also, the sign on the street have to be more or less the same, because when you drive with our car in another country, you should be used to the sign in another country. Okay? So, this is the three main criteria. As I told you, I try also to give a political view. The easiest way for me was to go and to use the words of the only Italian president of the Commission we had, which is Romano Prodi, who was actually apparently did a lot for the European integration. He was the person who carried Europe into the monetary union. So he refers to the criteria, and he says there are some political criteria: democracy, rule of law, human rights, and respect and protection of the minorities, which are the Copenhagen criteria, of course, the economic criteria, functioning market, and to be able to withstand competitive pressure on market forces. But what does accession to the European Union mean? He was looking at that time to he wrote another speech on this topic in 2004. This is very important. The idea was we will have countries getting into the European Union. He was thinking, of course, of the bunch of countries that were getting to be members of the European Union. The problem of most of the accession countries in that period is that the country from East were coming from a different, very much different political regime than compared to the Western country. Remember, we had a barrier, also a physical barrier in Berlin, distinguishing Western Europe and Eastern Europe, okay? Which meant economic differences, also different thinking, different way of thinking, okay? So that also Germany, you remember, was split in two countries at that time. Also Germans were very different between themselves. And so the idea is we will help Eastern countries. Sorry if I refer generally speaking to Eastern countries. This is not much precise, but please let me do so. And we will help them to adjust their economic condition and also to be used to our way to see what is democracy. Okay. So that was the idea that after staying together little by little, they will acquire the Western European values. I'm not a politician, okay? I'm a lawyer, so please, if I say something wrong, correct me. Okay, we had the integration of the countries in 2004. That was a difficult period. There was, as we know, the transitional phase, but there were fears from the Western European countries. One of the fears was the so-called Polish plumber fear. I will come to the Polish plumber in a while. Sorry for who is the Poland from here, because okay. So what was the fear? The fear was now we should have the Chinese plumber fear, but you know, or Chinese products fear, whatever. Anyway, the idea is people will circulate freely in Europe at a lower cost because wages in Eastern Europe are lower, so they will come in Western Europe to provide their services at a lower price, a kind of social dumping, okay? So there was the so-called Services Directive, the Bolkestein Directive, that provide for the country of origin principle. In France, this was felt as, you can read on yourself, as the fear of having people coming from Western Europe providing services at a lower price as compared to the services provided by home workers, social dumping. And so, of course, it was nice because in Poland they used this as a joke to increase. That was a tourist office who had the way to use this in order to increase the tourism. I'm not going to French, but please come here. Anyway, the result was dramatic. As you know, the referendum on the Rome Treaty failed because two of the founding members, two of the 6 founding members, who should have been the more European, not the founders, vote no for the referendum on the so-called Constitution for Europe. The Bolkestein Directive was changed. So the country of origin principle disappeared. It became just freedom of product services, which was already there. So, and then we, as you know, also the Treaty of Rome did not come into truth. We arrived to the Treaty of Lisbon later on. That was a kind of smaller development. Now, in my idea, it's important to keep in mind what is Europe and what are the basic principles of European integration, to also to understand why are some conditions of accession to new member states and why these conditions are very important. Those are the principles I personally consider to be some of the most important principles of European integration. Of course, you may disagree because it's a kind of matter. The fourth principle is the principle that I've been studying for a long time, and I'm sure this is the basic principle concerning the functioning of the European market. I will come to this later on. The second and the third principle are kind of political principles. We have to see what is the legal status of these principles, but of course, if from a market union we want to go to something that is kind of federal Europe, something that is not federal but is a stronger union, we need to have these principles. And the fourth are the economic criteria, which can be seen as the Maastricht criteria, which all of the member states which are members of the Union, and especially of the European Monetary Union, have to respect. So remember, the accession principle or condition are conditions that to be respected by all of the member states. Remember, it's not something for the new member states. All of the member states have to respect the principle established by the treaties. Mutual recognition. Mutual recognition is something that all of the students of European integration know. We can go to the Cassis de Dijon formula, which is probably the basic question that every professor of European Union law would do to his students. So what does it mean? I will use the word of the communication of the Commission of 1980, which means that member state may not in principle prohibit the sale in its territory of a product lawfully produced and marketed in another member state. What does it mean? We should accept workers, products, services that are provided according to the legislation of another member state. We should accept that if it is produced according to the rules of that state, or nowadays more and more to the rules of that member state, which are established according maybe to a European directive, we should let this product, or people who acquire a degree in another country, to move freely also in our country. This is the basic principle to accept the differences of other member states. This is the basic principle of integration, of economic integration. This is the minimum standard. And this standard is also enshrined in the Constitution of the US. There are two principles that are very important: the full faith and credit clause, which has to do with the recognition of judgment, administrative acts of one state as compared to the other states. Because remember, United States, we see United States as a whole country, but it's made up of 50 states with their own legislation, with their own Supreme Courts, and so on, with their own sets of rules, with their own differences, with their own way of producing stuff. The integration also of US, it has been very difficult from this perspective. And in some respect, European integration is probably stronger than the US integration. And then the Commerce Clause has to do with the movement of goods. So you see, federal country has some of the basic principles that keep together this country. From the market perspective, of course. Solidarity. The first principle, as I told you, is mutual recognition. If you're interested in this principle, I remember one of the first things I wrote on this, it's a chapter of a book of 1986. It was a project of the European University Institute, and it was a comparison of US and Europe from the, I should come back to this, from this perspective, okay? Joseph Weiler wrote extensively to the basic principle that put together and keep together the market. Solidarity. Solidarity is an important point of European integration. It's extremely important principle of European integration. It was already in the Declaration of Schuman of 1950. How should Europe be built? Through concrete achievements which create a de facto solidarity. This is a wonderful word. What does solidarity mean? Helping the others also if you do not have to do so. So the problem is you do not have to do so, so this is not a legal obligation. So solidarity is not a legal principle. That's the trick. However, solidarity grew more and more. It was used by the Court of Justice in some judgments. This is an important judgment, but that was case law that did one step forward and two steps backwards. This is in the field of health, tourism, and social advantages. In specific, that was a problem of social advantages provided by a country to the people coming from another country. In this case, the Court of Justice said that also the host country should provide some economic allowances to non-working people coming from another country, because it should accept a certain degree of financial solidarity. Okay? I wrote a lot of this. I do not have the time to go in depth to this. But anyway, solidarity was accepted together with the idea of European citizenship to force the national legislation. Of course, that was one of the reasons why UK got out from the European Union, one of the reasons. So, is solidarity a legal principle? Can we find some legal basis for this? Yes, there are some legal basis in the treaty, financial solidarity, but it has to do not with provision of money to citizens, but as solidarity between states, European Stability Mechanism, and so on. In the field of migration, and this is a difficult political issue, and then also in some other fields, you can find the word solidarity. This is an interesting field that especially young students should start to study in depth, and only a few people are studying this concept. Rule of law. And now we go to the hot issue, rule of law. What are as I told you, the reference to member state, to state that want to become member states is to Article 2 of the Treaty of European Union, where the fundamental principles are defined: human dignity, freedom, democracy, equality, rule of law. And these values are common: pluralism, non-discrimination, tolerance, justice, solidarity again, and equality. So those are the principles that all of the countries of Europe have to accept. But now we go to the point. Rule of law is a legal concept or is it more a political issue? This is Article 6, but do not have the time to stop on this. So rule of law. Political or legal? Of course, rule of law is a typical legal concept. It's a typical concept that courts will judge on. We have different ideas what is rule of law. Rule of law, it could be defined in many, many different ideas. I remember conferences, books on this topic. It cannot be. It is also translated differently in other languages. In English, it's a poor language, so there is only rule of law. In Italian, we have different words for this concept, words in other countries. Again, and then we come to the hot issues. How should we judge the respect of these values by the states? Could you distinguish rule of law as a judicial, something that should be adjudicated by judges, or something that should be dealt at a political level? In other means, should countries be allowed to verify maybe the democracy level of other European countries? That's the issue. Well, I will go to the easy part of this. So I will stick to judgment that confer the preliminary ruling procedure. Okay, that have been the hot issues concerning Hungary and Romania recently. What is the preliminary ruling procedure? You know it because this is something, again, that is studied by students when they study European law. The preliminary ruling procedure is what keeps the judicial system together in the European Union, because it's the only way in which first instance courts, final instance court, Court of Justice are kept together in order to interpret and apply European Union law. It is a difficult mechanism because, for instance, this is one of the studies I did when I was still, in 1999, when I was still a PhD student. I studied how many times French, Italian, and other judges did preliminary ruling where they had to do so. And the first preliminary ruling of the Consiglio di Stato of Italy, it was in the mid of the 80s, okay? Which means more than 30 years after the establishment of the European, at the time, communities. It is impossible that they didn't see any case concerning European law in 30 years. So it means they didn't want to refer a question to the European Court of Justice. They were blamed by the Commission, but only after many, many years the Commission started proceedings against the national government because the judge failed to make a preliminary ruling, okay? The only way, but anyway, you know, you make a trial against the government, and the judiciary is another branch of the government, so it is useless. But the idea of the Court of Justice was to increase the mutual confidence with the national judges. Here we have a different problem with Hungary and Romania. We had a kind of limitation of the use of the preliminary ruling procedure. Again, this has to do with the European legal system. And one of the basic rules is that when we go to European affairs, the last words belong to the Court of Justice. So it is up to the Court of Justice to decide if you can do or you cannot do a preliminary ruling. That's it. So, you know, when we are part of a game, we should accept the rule of the game. If we don't like the rule of the game, we can try to change the rule of the game together, but not by their own. Otherwise, we have to accept who established the rule of the game and who is the judge that has the power. Like when there is a tennis match, there is an arbiter. He can say something wrong. Never mind, he is the judge, and you have to respect what he says. So I'm not going to the judgment, but just to tell you that in this case, rule of law, according to Medea, should be seen as applied by the European Court of Justice, because we are not dealing with internal matters concerning the judiciary. We can question if this can be dealt according to Article 2.6 of the European Union or not. But here we are dealing with the judicial system of the European Union, to the integrated system of the European Union. The conditionality. Here we go to the political side. Okay? Here we go to the political side. You know, you do not respect the rule of law, so there are some conditionality rules. I'm not so much in favor of this conditionality from a political point of view. Again, as it has been established through legislation, through European legislation, then it is up to the Court of Justice to decide if it is lawful or not. My idea is that sometimes we should avoid to use the law and to leave some hot issues to the politics. I'm a lawyer, but sometimes I think that law and lawyers should step backwards and leave to, to the work to the politicians to find an agreement. because, sometimes the law is too much rigid. So the law was important to build the European Union as it is today, because the creation of the common market as we see today is much the result of judicial decisions. The mutual recognition principle, it has been established by the European Court of Justice. Then it has been applied also by legislation. So, European integration, this is the last one, so I'm finished. It is more than a common market. It's not just European integration. The common market would be based on mutual recognition and economic conditions, but now European Union is more and more something more. It entails a complex and difficult mix of law and politics, enshrined by principles that have sometimes a double role, a double face, solidarity and the rule of law. They have a political side, but they have also a legal side. We should be able to use the correct side at each time. Thank you very much for your attention.